Good morning, Revolution, everyone, and welcome to our program this morning. We got a lot to talk about. Rosanna is not with us this morning, but have no fear. Taryn has joined us in her place. Welcome, Taryn. And good morning to Scott and Anita. A lot to talk about this week. Mr. Trump was indicted for the third time. Is the third charm, or will it do the country harm? We want to dig into that issue. Uh, this week, the Fitch rating agency downgraded the United States. What's going on with the economy? Was it justified or not? We're going to discuss that. And then finally, kind of a philosophical moral discussion. Yes, communists have morals. Should the death penalty be applied in the case of the shooter, killer, the mass murderer at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh? But it's a more general question with respect to what position do we take on universal issues like the death penalty, or can we? We'll be thinking about that as time goes on. But first, Anita, Trump indicted first time in New York for campaign violation charges, second time Florida for the stolen or borrowed or whatever you want to call those documents case with respect to national security and other issues. And now for the coup attempt in Washington on January 6th and the events leading up to it. Is the third time the charm, or will it do the country harm, in your opinion?
Well, I think the harm has already been done, and I think this is finally. I'm glad they're finally calling for some accountability on his most serious crime, which was to overturn a free and fair election, just against everything that we learned about civics in the United States from the time we were in elementary school. That the peaceful transition of power is the democracy's superpower, and Trump just flouted that. He was not going to agree to that. He held on to the presidency just like he held on to all those documents. And I think we're finally getting some accountability. So I think this one is the most serious. This is the thing that people really can see. Why would we want this person to ever be president again or in any elected office after trying to steal an election from the American people? So I think this is a healing moment, actually, and I look forward to seeing how it plays out in the trial that's coming up.
Scott, Anita says free and fair. I doubt it was free. I mean, the darn thing cost about $1 billion. The fairness of it is what's in dispute. Third time charm, or will it do the country harm? Your view.
Well, I think this is really the kind of the like the crux maybe of the criminal issues, and there are many surrounding Donald Trump, is the attempt to to prevent the election from being certified, to force himself on the country as president a second time. That that's really like the core of the attack on democracy, and it has to be strenuously opposed with every kind of measure. Is the third time the charm? I don't know what number of times is going to be the charm, and I say we just keep indicting and indicting until there's nothing left to indict for, because there's plenty of stuff. But I think this is a good move. I noticed someone remarking that he did not hold like a post arraignment rally, post indictment rally this time. So maybe that's a sign that he's also beginning to get a sense that he's in hot water. I think it's a good move, and it's something we should celebrate, and we should push for a public trial. This is something that should be aired in public in the presence of the American people.
Taryn, to you, charm or harm?
I think it's really important that he is put on trial for trying to overthrow the US government. I think about all of the things that people in this country go to jail for, and it can be for something as small as refusing to pay the fare on the subway or sleeping on the sidewalk, or, I've seen the police break people's bones for peacefully protesting in the street. And so if this is a country where rule of law is supposed to be a thing, then I believe that it is necessary and very important for Donald Trump to go on trial and for him to be jailed. And I wish that they had done it sooner. I wish they had gotten that guy Jack Smith in, a year ago to start chasing these leads, because this is, it's about time.
It's about time. Anita, how did we get to this point? I mean, it's a serious crisis in government and in governing and in the state of the country. In fact, it has implications for the state of the world, which we'll come back to in just a moment. But where was the first step or first steps taken that led perhaps inevitably to this point?
Well, Joe, I would like to say people voting third party in 2016 was the first blow, I think. We really, there were people who despised Hillary Clinton because she was a woman, basically. I think that was all that it took in some cases. And instead they went third party, or they decided that maybe Hillary Clinton was going to win anyway, so why not vote for this, upstart, brash guy from New York? And they really that election had some serious consequences. We have a Supreme Court that's 6-3, and just all kinds of consequences. But I think that was the moment. And remember the Women's March that took place the next day after, I guess, inauguration of Donald Trump, that people knew what was coming down the pike. So I think that was our first mistake, and it's just we've let him go, or let them go, the Trumpist forces, with no accountability all of this time. 2020 we did stop the electoral success of Trump, but you can see that really had consequences of its own. So I think that was the path. That was the starting point. 2016 was the most important election, and I think we blew it then. So we'll see. We're cleaning up after that.
Scott, there's an old country saying, it's a long road to hoe. Anita starts the date in 2016. Is that the date? And is the voting third party against Mrs. Clinton the fault, or are there other sources to this mess that the country's in?
Well, it's the kind of coming together of several processes on different timescales, and one of them is exactly what Anita pointed out. 2016 was a really important election, and the refusal of some people to recognize that was, it hurt the country and it hurt a lot of people. On the other hand, we could also take it back much longer to the beginning, maybe of what's called the Southern strategy of the GOP, this very overt embrace of segregationists and like conservative evangelical fundamentalists, and the birth of the modern right wing, which has sort of been gaining strength kind of throughout that happened in the 70s, began, and then really gathered steam under Reagan, and just kept kind of morphing into what we now have as a party that is increasingly fascist oriented, that is opposed to majority rule, that's opposed to democracy, and of course we would be remiss if we didn't look at that in the context of the deepening crisis of capitalism and the need for the capitalist class to exert its power in increasingly brutal and violent ways. So there are longer processes as well that resulted in Trump's victory.
Taryn, You out in the country and you digging a row, you're trying to, where do you put down your hoe?
Well, I think that it's important to remind everybody that Trump, even in 2016, lost the popular vote. And I think that the strategy of the right wing in this country has been, probably since the beginning of this country, against democracy, against letting everybody vote and having that count for something. I think that people in this country are fed up with austerity. I think they're fed up with bigotry. Polls after polls indicate that. And so I think that it's a democratic question. You know, these people are not interested anymore in winning elections. We can see that they're still moving against our working class through the court system and through other anti-democratic means, because we didn't elect these judges, etc. So I would say it goes all the way back. I think it's the real fundamental struggle for the franchise and for expanding the franchise as much as possible. And you can see it with the right wing's attempts to try and redistrict everything and put in voter IDs. And, you know, this one guy running for the GOP candidacy, he says he wants to raise the voting age to 25. And, you know, they really only want to do this because they know that they don't have the votes. I mean, the Electoral College itself is not a democratic system. So I would put the origins of this crisis way, way back at the beginning of the country. But I do think that right now is a really important time to act and to jail Trump and to show that these anti-democratic measures are not going to fly with this country anymore.
Nixon Southern strategy. That's one marker on the road. But I guess you could go all the way back to Barry Goldwater and that campaign. And then you move up to where did Reagan go to send a signal of where he was coming from when he went down to Philadelphia, Mississippi? Remember that? Where the bodies of Cheney, Schwartz, and Goodman, were those the names of the young men who were murdered by the Klan?
Mhm.
Then you got to talk about the Willie Horton campaign. Remember that? And you got to talk about, and that was in the campaign against Dukakis. And there was that Republican strategist who later repented. I forget the guy's name. And then you got Gingrich and the contract on America. And you could just go on, and the whole setting up of the immoral majority and Jerry Falwell and the decision of the Republican National Committee to court the evangelical right. I mean, it's just one thing after another. And this has been the point we're trying to make, a conscious policy on the part of the ruling class to move in this direction over 40, 50 years. And okay, there's some of them that are saying, oh no, Liz Cheney and them, but your people contributed to this. And you know, in the All People's Front, y'all got to come to some admission, because Taryn, we have to think about what it's going to take to get the country out of this mess. And I mean, how do you move beyond and get to what Scott likes to call a decisive defeat of the extreme right? Do you have an opinion on that, Taryn?
Yeah, I think an overwhelming loss for the Republicans in 2024 is really, really important. And I understand that, you know, like we have a Democratic mayor in name only here in New York. So I understand that some people will get a little bit skeeved by that, but folks need to send a really clear message that they are not accepting the extreme right's contract on America. I appreciate that wording. So I think that getting everyone out to vote, while at the same time doing everything in our power, and Biden needs to be doing everything in his power, and Congress needs to be doing everything in their power to strengthen labor, because the vote is our will, but labor is our teeth, right? So labor is how it is that we can fight back against anti-democratic measures coming from the top down. You know, if there had been a coup against the U.S. government in 2020, labor would be our only recourse at that point. So I think that a strategy of pushing people to vote against the fascist danger and also strengthening labor is probably the best way forward.
Scott, to you, how do we get out of this mess? What's the road away from Philadelphia, Mississippi, and towards a decisive defeat of the right?
I agree with Taryn. I think that's right on. You know, overwhelming electoral victory, overwhelming repudiation of the fascist GOP, along with strengthening labor, strengthening the ability of the people to actually exert their power as the producers of wealth. And in terms of policies, we also need to we need to expand the franchise. We need to protect it, obviously, but also increase the numbers of people that can vote and what people can vote on. So that means stuff like extending the right to vote to non-citizens who pay taxes in the various electoral districts and levels of this country. Also, community control of police, and specifically getting these right-wing vigilantes and terrorists out of the police forces, since we know from the FBI that there's been a huge amount of infiltration. So there's it's going to be a hard road. It's going to require more than just the usual democratic institutions. When the Civil War ended and it was time to build a new kind of democracy in this country, Reconstruction didn't happen with the usual tools. It took new kinds of democratic institutions, new initiatives to, build this, better democracy that was ultimately gutted and overthrown. But it's a good model for what needs to happen.
Tara, Anita, okay, all this political stuff, community control of the police, advancing democracy, but aren't these things related to what's happening in the economy as well? Without being narrow materialists, isn't there an economic basis for it? And doesn't the economic policy have to change in order to pull the ground from beneath the regressive, constricting, what's the opposite of the tendencies that are pushing the country apart? And what would that look like? We had a big discussion in the board the other night about the Biden economic policy. And they say that there's a resurrection of Keynesianism or neo-Keynesianism. Bernstein is a neo-Keynesian, they say, and more government intervention in the economy. And is that the way forward?
Wow, you gave me the hard question again, Joe. That's fine, but I think I have to agree with Taryn that changing the relative strength of labor in this country is an economic change, and that could only help to expand those democratic rights. And what Scott was saying about expansion of democracy, I have to go back to Ohio, and we have an opportunity next Tuesday to protect our democratic rights in Ohio. And it's just frightening that anyone would vote in favor of giving away their democratic rights. So I think there's a brainwashing going on, a gaslit right wing in this country that really does not understand what's going on and doesn't understand its own interests. And I think that has to change. For one thing, but I think I have to agree that more power and autonomy on the part of the working class, as against the ruling class and its various divisions, and which we're going to get to in a few minutes. I think that would really go a long way.
Taryn, I want to drill down on these on the economic question, because it seems to me that as so long as the workers are suffering, sections of the middle class are being pushed into the working class. People are experiencing social angst, living less well than their parents, not being satisfied with their lives. They're going to find scapegoats. It's kind of a breeding ground for reaction. So, to you, neo-Keynesian economic policy, state intervention, a 50-state strategy, investments in industries and right-to-work states providing jobs. Is that the way forward? Is that plus the political innovations y'all were talking about? Is that the way forward? Or is it just putting a Band-Aid on cancer and you got to route the disease out by its roots?
Well, I think that the thing that Keynesianism, all types of Keynesianism, regardless if it's neo or the classical Keynesianism, I guess, it really requires a strong state, right? And I don't mean like the state of California, I mean state institutions like the Justice Department and the EPA and, OSHA and all of these different state institutions that don't necessarily change all that much between elections. Obviously, a politician can choose to defund one over the other. But, the reason why Fitch actually downgraded the US's ratings on its debt is because they said there is a crisis of governance or an erosion of governance in the United States, right? So you have Joe Biden and his administration who are doing, I would assume their best to try and help out the average worker. But meanwhile, you have these governors in states like, Texas and Florida, and even places like Minnesota that are rolling back labor rights at the exact same time. So, everybody's been dealing with this really outrageous weather. And workers have been dying in states like Texas, where the governor basically said, well, we're not going to give workers a water break, or we're not going to give them a break when it's too hot outside. You have people in states like Minnesota who are basically trying to pass laws to let children who are as young as 14 years old work in bars, serving drinks to adults. You also have the rollback of child labor laws around slaughterhouses and construction sites and things like this. So even though the federal government might be saying this is our big economic plan, there is so much from the right wing that is pushing against that it seems to ratings agencies like Fitch, like the US is having a problem, like an erosion of governance. And then you also end up with this guy, Donald Trump, who's trying to overthrow the US government and hasn't been put in jail yet and is now running for president again. If you are somebody who's working at some sort of international financial institution and you're looking at the situation in the United States on paper, where women can no longer get an abortion, where they have rolled back affirmative action for people of color, where Joe Biden did a really, really great thing trying to forgive a portion of our student loan debt. He should have done the whole thing, or said he wanted to do the whole thing. And then the courts push back against that. So from the ratings agency's perspective, it's like, how is the economy going to work if no one is listening to the federal government? If the federal government no longer has the ability to force these right-wing governors and these state senates to do what the federal government thinks is best for the economy? And how are these right-wing governors or state senators going to, agree to what the federal government wants to happen if meanwhile you have all these little fake electors still running around like the state of Michigan, although thank goodness they've arrested those people as well, which is why I think that the Trump indictment is not just good for democracy, it's good for the economy. Because how on earth are you supposed to run any kind of organization, much less the United States government, if you have people who are actively trying to undermine the very basis of how you would implement economic policy, right? This goes from the Supreme Court all the way down to the local level. There has to be some sort of shoring up of state power in order for us to do anything about the economy, whether it's Keynesian or not. So that would be my basic answer to your question.
But now, Darren has a point here, buddy. I mean, there's a crisis not only in governance, but in all institutions. The church, nobody believes anymore, No confidence in the mass media. All they do is sell each other's movies and sell each other's books. It's a big entertainment. So nobody believes it anymore. You got Lindsey Graham running around talking about no confidence in the jury system. They can't get a fair trial in Washington, D.C. for Trump because, there's too many black and Latinos in D.C., too many white liberals. And you got Mr. DeSantis. DeSantis going around and I'm going to slit the throat of all the civil servants if I get the day after I'm getting out this is the kind of language that they're. So, Scott, how do you strengthen the eroding U.S. capitalist state? And if you do shore it up, aren't you undermining the very thing you want to replace? Because the social revolution calls for the replacement of the bourgeois state by a working class state.
So
How
I'm
about
gonna
tough questions, Anita? I socked it to I socked it to Scott just now.
So I'm gonna go like right back around the circle and say, to shore up confidence, to restore confidence in institutions, in social governmental institutions of all sorts, they need to be working for the people, and that's how you get people's confidence back. And it's not a switch that can be flipped, right? It's not we're going to make a couple changes and then people will believe again. It's going to be a process of rebuilding people's political possibility for political engagement, people's rebuilding democracy. And that is not going to shore up the capitalist state. That's the thing. Like every step we take to actually build people's ability to participate politically, every step we take to institute programs that will provide real benefits to people, that weakens the power of the ruling class, it weakens the position of the ruling class, strengthens the position of the working class and people, and gets us a bit closer. Now, that doesn't mean that we can just make, little adjustment after little adjustment either, and eventually we'll get there. There comes a tipping point, right? What's it called in the theory of dialectics? Like the quantitative change becomes qualitative change, right? Little changes over time, little victories, little reforms, like in Ohio, protecting the citizen-led initiatives, stuff like that, it adds up. And you come to a tipping point where everything changes, the class basis of power changes. And but it starts by engaging people again. Because right now, I think a vast majority of the American people feel, even if they have ideas about how society should look that are generally democratic and generally progressive, feel no ability to actually work for those changes, and we have to change that.
Anita, I wonder though, the room for maneuver is growing more and more limited, because we live in a world economy, and part of the economic requirements kind of depend on what other countries do and their policies. Austerity became an international policy during the Reagan period. First it was Reagan, and then it was Thatcher, or maybe first it was Thatcher, and then I don't remember. And then the French did it, and then the Swiss did it, and then the Germans, and so on. And then it kind of became part of the IMF and World Bank. I wonder if this new policy, and Taryn, the question's coming next to you, will have international ramifications, repercussions. Will it get picked up, or will the austerity-ites dominate? What do you think, Anita?
Joe, I'm not sure what you're asking. I think I think part of the reason Fitch downgraded the bonds from the United States was because of the constant deadlines and threats of shutting down the government, threats of defaulting on our debts that were acted out in Congress. I think that and I just have to wonder about who is Fitch anyway. What does Fitch represent in our perspective? Ruling class finance capital, is that a global finance capital? Is that who Fitch represents? And would they prefer a government that didn't have conflicts and where it was a united ruling class and maybe even a fascist government? Is that what Fitch and the rest of the finance capitalists would prefer? A more predictable world economy? So this worries me. I'm not sure, where we're going with that. I don't know where Fitch is and who they represent and how the ruling class in our country is so split on certain issues that it would pose a threat to our credit rating.
Taryn, you want to take a shot at that? Who is Fitch?
Sure.
And will this policy, does it have the potential to become more generalized?
Sure. Yeah, no, Fitch is on Wall Street. They're downtown here in New York, and they do represent finance capital. And it is correct. And I think that finance capital generally does prefer fascism to socialism, right? We can definitely accept that as being something that Fitch would prefer. I think that in terms of the global ramifications of this situation, they're very dire, right? I mean, you can look outside, you can feel the weather, you can read the news. Things are looking really, really tough right now. And I think that what scares me is not so much what it is that Fitch represents, although obviously it's very clear that they represent international finance capital and U.S. Finance capital. But I think that what scares me is that you're going to have workers who are increasingly immiserated over the next period, whether that's because of COVID, whether that's because of the weather, whether that's because there are very few good jobs out there for folks, whether it's because, people can't have access to healthcare anymore, et cetera. My concern is that when workers are looking for an answer, they are not looking to us, right? That they are looking to people like Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis who say, don't even worry about that. The reason why the economy is doing poorly is because God is unhappy that there are drag queens reading books to children at public libraries, right? And so this is why I think it's really important for labor to step up, not just in terms of turning out the vote and defending democracy, but also coming forward with some real workable plans that will make people's lives better, give people an alternative, because there is no doubt in my mind that Wall Street would much prefer Trump in office to somebody, say, like Bernie Sanders, any day of the week. And so if they see that, the extreme right is attacking Joe Biden's economic plan and making it so that, you have all these different debt deadlines that are coming up, that they're scared about whether or not the US government is going to default on everything or what have you. If Trump says, well, I'll make everything okay again, or if somebody who comes after Trump, because I'm very concerned about Trump, but I'm always way more concerned about the person who's coming after Trump. If that person is stepping forward and saying, don't worry, I'm going to protect your profits. I'm going to let you let 14-year-old girls work at Hooters. I'm going to let workers die of thirst. I will, stack up ICE prisons with lots and lots of migrant workers to keep the overall wages down or what have you. I think that is what Fitch would prefer, for sure, which is why I think that folks need to get organized and labor needs to step up and take a role that possibly they've never had in this country before when it comes to leadership of the workers. Labor has to say there is a better way and then also articulate very clearly what that way is. Otherwise, I think we're going to be in big trouble.
Well, we got a hard road to hoe. I mean, internationally. So, and you may have a neo-Keynesian economic policy in Washington, but you got a right-wing government in India. You got a centrist government that's imposing austerity in France. And look at those protests over the pensions and so on and so forth. You got a right-wing government in the UK, you know, and okay, the counter-currents in Brazil and some other places, South Africa, but you got to hold the road. That's you got to uplift the dirt from the ground up, and it has to be in the economy. It has to be in the political structure. It has to be in the social structure. You know, it has to be that restoration of confidence has to be many-sided, and it can only come through struggle. That's the only way. It's not going to be handed down from on high by anyone. We're going to continue to dig into these issues, obviously, over the next period. Let's try to bring our discussion with a close. There was an important verdict the other day in Pittsburgh. Robert Bowers, the murderer in that terrible tragedy at the Tree of Life Synagogue, convicted of murder, sentenced to the death penalty. The judge has no discretion, none. Anita, death penalty, yes or no? And if
No.
yes, why? If no, why?
I'd say no. It doesn't deter any crimes. This was a suicidal person to begin with, Robert Bowers, and I think the Robert Bowers was a disturbed person who should never have permit. He had such a problematic childhood and such a hard life and such little capacity, and yet he was sold guns. He came in with an AR-15 and handguns. It's just I think it brutalizes society to have the death penalty, to have the government kill people, and it robs their relatives of any hope that he would redeem himself eventually, and it also deprives people who are studying how people come to those kind of actions and how they change over time. So I think there's a lot we could learn from a person like Robert Bowers over the years that he would survive in prison. I'm all for him never being in custody for the rest of his life, absolutely. But to have the government murder him, I just don't think that's healthy all around.
Taryn, death penalty, yes or no in the case of, and more broadly, in your opinion?
Well, when I was younger, I used to believe in the death penalty because a guy like this, he's a Nazi pig. Lots of people have bad families growing up. Lots of people have mental health issues, but many, many, many millions of people who suffer from those things do not go out and shoot up synagogues, murder old people out of hatred. However, most people who are on death row don't look like this guy. Most people on death row are there because they're poor and they're African American or they're Latino and they can't afford a good defense. And so I just don't think that this government has any legitimacy to take anyone's life personally. I firmly believe that now. I didn't feel like that when I was younger because I thought, oh, there are just some people that are so awful, you have to set an example of. But I don't believe that anymore, because if you say that, then you're saying that about every single person who's killed on death row. And as we know, many, many people are murdered on death row who are not even guilty of the crimes that they were accused of. And they didn't have equal access to justice, and they didn't have equal access to, resources in their lives, which might have led them into other places, etc. So no, I don't agree with the death penalty at all, even in this case.
Scott, reverse the equation. You got a government of legitimacy, people's government. Racism's off the table. Sexism no longer practiced. Should the state commit murder?
I don't believe in the death penalty, even even in a socialist state, even in a state that works as you describe. I think thinking that ending someone's life as punishment for a crime is a way of bettering society, solving problems in society. It's it's a brutal and lazy shortcut. Just like thinking that we can solve, the problem of homelessness by rounding homeless people up and throwing their belongings away, or thinking that we can, fix the difficulties at the border by tearing families apart and throwing people in jail. That's just not. It's not a solution. It's an attempt to disappear a problem. In fact, it's the kind of the culmination of the logic of prisons. So prisons absolutely necessary, but the death penalty, no, the death penalty, I don't think even in the kind of state you described, I don't think it has a role.
These are some tough issues, and we're going to continue to study them, weigh in on them, and take positions. No to the death penalty, period. Call me what you want. I think that it's barbaric. We think it's barbaric. We need to move beyond and find different ways of addressing the horrific crime. And they are horrific, but doing something as horrific, it's not just a question of quantity. Even in the case of one, doesn't solve the problem. That does it for us this week on Good Morning Revolution. Till next week, we'll be back. Stay strong, stay safe, stay in the fight. And if you're going to be in D.C. on, when is that, the 26th, for the March on Washington to commemorate the 1963 March, I think it's the 60th or 70th anniversary, we'll be there to greet you. Until then, goodbye. Have a great weekend.
Later, comrades.
Keep on fighting.